Okay, excellent. Good morning again, everyone. I think we've got a few people online, so let's get cracking with the session. So I'm Christopher Skalkwyk. I'll be your facilitator for today. And just before we go to the agenda, a few house rules. So we'll keep everyone on mute and cameras off for the most of the session, but there will be a Q&A session at the end where feel free to raise your hand and we'll unmute and you can ask any questions that you want. And then the recording will be shared to everyone after the session as well. Okay, just regarding our agenda for today, I'll give a quick introduction on ASEN in general, and then the Circular Food Systems for Rwanda project, which this webinar forms a part of, the knowledge sharing activities, and then I'll hand over to my colleague Chris Wyatt to go into the juicy stuff where he'll get into circular food systems and give a few practical examples and case studies, and also a few examples of some of the SMEs that we worked with in the Circular Food Systems for Rwanda project. Then we'll have a short Q&A and I'll do a closing. And at the closing, we'll just ask you to fill in a quick survey to get your feedback on how this session has gone. Okay, so quickly on ASEN. So for those of you that's not aware, ASEN is Africa's original think and do tank for circular economy transformation. We're connecting over 500 practitioners across 42 African countries while delivering tangible impact through project implementation, like this CIRF project, for example, research, knowledge sharing, and capacitation, like we like doing in webinars like these. So our vision is a mouthful, where our vision is to build a restorative African economy that generates well-being and prosperity, inclusive of all its people, through new forms of economic production and consumption, which maintain and regenerate the environmental resources. So basically encapsulating all the principles that comes with circular economy. And we work towards this vision through our strategic priorities. Our three priorities is quite punchy. We connect, transform, and empower. So when it comes to connect, we build and strengthen this comprehensive network of circular economy practitioners. We foster collaboration across countries and sectors and different stakeholder groups. And then in the transform part, we deliver impactful project that translates the circular economy principles into tangible business models. And I think that comes through quite nicely in this CIRF project that we're working on. And then the last one, the empower part, where we equip stakeholders with knowledge, skills, and tools needed to become effective circular economy champions. So that's just in a nutshell what ASEN is about, and our representation over the continent. So like we said, over 500 members across 42 African countries. And our approach is, when we have enough members in a specific country, we form chapters. So this is just a representation of some of our active chapters. And just to highlight a few is South Africa, Nigeria, and Kenya, and Rwanda is some of our very, very active chapters that we have. And I'll also share some details in the chat where you can read up further on ASEN and how you can collaborate with us and get networking with us. So quickly on the Circular Food Systems for Rwanda project. So ASEN has been an implementing partner for this project for the last 3 years, and the idea of the project was in 2 cohorts. We gave technical assistance to 20 SMEs in Rwanda to provide assistance and improve their ability to utilize circular business models within their own businesses. And here's just one of the photo of a nice example that I'm sure we'll get to later in the presentation of one of the SMEs that reduced the waste in their food production system by preserving some of the mushrooms that they grew, which prevented losses, and they could also create new products which they could sell to the local community. So that's just a quick summary on ASEN and the CIRF project. And with that, I'll hand over to Chris. So go ahead, Chris, you can introduce yourself quickly and jump into your presentation. Thanks a lot and enjoy, everyone.
Great. Thank you very much, Christo, and welcome to everybody. I'm going to introduce myself while I find my window to share. So I'm the business development advisor for ASIN. I was executive director for a number of years. The youngsters are now coming through and flying the flag. There is a number of different things that we're involved in. Obviously, I've been in the game for a little bit longer than Christo. He has a lot more hair than I do, but it really is a key focus of us to look at the options around circular food systems. So what we are looking at in terms of understanding where this is going, I'm going to try and take you through a bit of a journey. First of all, I'm going to look.
Sorry to interrupt, Chris. You're
Yeah.
sharing. I think you're sharing the wrong screen.
Okay, let's just have a look. Sorry. Window, circular food systems. Is that the right one?
There we go. Perfect.
Thank you. All right, so essentially what we're going to try and do is take a little bit of a journey just to understand, first of all, what circular food systems are. And then we'll try and take a little bit of a journey in terms of practical applications and address and understand what we have done with the circular food systems for Rwanda or the CIRF program, and really just give some key sort of direct applications and benefits in terms of what we're doing there. So what are circular food systems? Essentially, we first of all need to look at what the circular economy principles are. And there's three primary principles of circular economy. The first is easily design out waste and pollution. The second is to keep products and materials in use. And the third is to regenerate natural systems. And essentially, the objectives of the circular economy principles are to create a restorative and regenerative by design system that aims to keep products, components, and materials at the highest utility and the highest value for as long as possible, if not always. And it also distinguishes between the technical and the biological cycles and the interlinkages between those. But effectively, we have a continuous positive development cycle and the opportunity to bring resources back into the system. When we understand food and how it fits in, there's a number of different nexus issues. In terms of resources, we don't like to call them waste, water, energy, and food. If you look at what the UN says in terms of the environmental impact of food loss and waste, it's responsible for about 8% of global greenhouse gas emissions. As well as in terms of the water used to produce lost or wasted food is equivalent to 3 times the volume of Lake Geneva. If you want to put that into local context, about 63% of all of our water is used for agriculture in this country. And if you take a 30% of that, that is a significant amount of water, probably something like the Big Dam by Durban. Nearly 30% of the world's agricultural land is occupied to produce food that is ultimately never consumed. And that is a scary statistic. But also, if we look at food use and distribution, if it's better managed, 14% of all emissions from agriculture could be avoided by 2050. So there's a lot of opportunities in terms of seeing how we can drive and develop these opportunities. So circular food systems, these are not just about crops and agriculture. There are systemic interconnections with a number of other components: energy, water, infrastructure, trade, particularly if one's looking at import and export, digitalization, design and packaging, transportation and logistics, skills and job creation, manufacturing, tourism, education, and health. So this systemic system we need to understand the interconnectivities between these. So to understand circular food systems in context with the broader principles of circularity, we need to understand and realize the potential for long-term sustainable change in creating a just transition. And for those of you unfamiliar with the term of a just transition, that really is a key focus in terms of what we talk about with circular economy, is that people are the central component of the system. So by bringing circular economy principles into circular food systems, we need to look at the R's. We've got rethink, regenerate, reuse, recover. There's a whole bunch more of them. But in rethinking, we really need to look at redesigning the system. What are we doing? What are we doing wrong? And how can we make that better? When we regenerate, it's that harmonization with nature. When we're looking at reuse, it's how do we keep that product in the system for as long as possible? And in reducing, it's to do better with less And recovering is closing that loop. How do we make sure that we recover? Now, recover, in our perspective in the food system, is not necessarily about energy recovery, which is often related to that process. But there's a huge amount of opportunities in terms of nutrients that can be recovered from waste streams that we prefer to look at in terms of the recover process. So this is a bit wordy, but it gives a sort of a background. What are circular food systems? And so we all know that food and food systems are absolutely essential to health, nutrition, the environment, society, and economic stability. But current food systems today are mostly based on a linear model, which is unsustainable. And that holds true for South Africa and pretty much most of Africa as well. Whilst we are still very circular and more productive in terms of the resources that we have, we are unfortunately bent into looking at GMO crops, fertilizers, pesticides, etc. But there are far too many losses and costs in the current agricultural practices. Residues are either burnt or left to rot. Post-harvest food losses are an all-time high, some 30% across Africa. Food waste and organics have no perceived value. And all of this while levels of food insecurity, malnutrition, and starvation are at an all-time high and increasing in Africa. So creating circular food systems is essential for so many reasons, but particularly in terms of feeding our nations. And we're expected to add another 1 billion people onto this continent in the next 30 years. We need to feed those people. So we need to be circumspect and sustainable with what we're doing. So food systems in a circular economy are based on 3 basic principles driven by design. And this is where we bring together the principles into agriculture. Firstly is regenerative farming practices, where we produce food locally, the best nutrient value where possible, and cheap and available, to reduce food loss and waste through improved post-harvest handling, processing, and logistics, and promote sustainable alternatives for food packaging materials. On the reuse side, we need to look at nutrients and resources within the food system and utilize farming models that don't require the ownership of materials or equipment. So we're talking there about the sharing economy, and we'll go into that later. So whilst these form the basic principles of circularity, the interrelationships through multiple sectors in the agricultural space are somewhat more complicated. So here's a diagram that we put together for the circular food systems for Rwanda, and it kind of gives an idea in terms of how all these different things work together, the circularity, the interconnectivity of this. And effectively, in the top left here, we have this issue of linear versus circular. And that line is really what we're talking about in terms of your trade. Are we looking at importing, where our balance of trade is against us, or are we looking at creating opportunities to export and becoming circular and self-sustainable? So when you look at the environment, essentially there are so many components of that. Where you look at the trees, agroforestry, the foods, and the crops, you've got to look at the natural environment in terms of the biodiversity. Looking at the carrying capacity of the land, we also use that for our animal-based systems, sheep, cattle, goats, chickens, etc. And then we have our natural systems like our rivers, and we also have this interrelationship in terms of carbon and nitrogen within the soil, as well as the nutrients and nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And often we see things as a problem. And often from a circular economy perspective, we prefer not to see problems. If you look at water hyacinth is seen as a massive issue across Africa. The simple reality is that's nature trying to fix things. A water hyacinth is a very productive plant. What it does is extracting the additional nutrients out of the water. And that's why we get these blooms. A lot of our waterways are covered with this, but that plant is actually providing nature's process. So let's not spray it or put insects on it that just sink that product back into the water and kill the oxygen. Let's look at that, because water hyacinth can be used for energy production, for biofuel production, to extract nutrients for organic fertilizers. It can be used for black soldier fly development for protein. So we've got to look at what nature is throwing at us and understand that there's a balance. And how do we work with that balance and understand nature? So within these different systems, and we'll go into these, we look at what comes from the trees. How do we look at making sure that we create opportunities from that? How do we ensure that the waste from that is not simply burnt or discarded? And we can look at that from an energy production perspective. One can create, through gasification, one can create biofuels, or one can create biochar. The animals and the plants will go through processing and abattoirs. How do we make sure that the products from there are also able to go back into the system? And then ultimately coming back to the last part of the triangle, which is the community and the social development, which is the center of what we look at from a circular economy perspective. And I'll go into these into some little detail, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to, first of all, give you an indication as to how some of these things can come together. I know some of you may have seen this video before. This is still going to be one of my favorite videos. And it really is, this is the 1 Acre Farm, and this is sourced through the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. I think we have Rudy on the call, who's from the 1 Acre Foundation as well, which is fantastic. But let's have a look at what can be done, just using simple opportunities to create and connect the dots. It's about a 6-minute video.
There are about 500 million smallholder farmers around the world who produce much of their world's food, using only a small fraction of agricultural land and resources. Ironically, this is a group that suffers disproportionately from hunger, poverty, and impacts of climate change. So improving the way small farms are designed and managed so that they are more productive and profitable is a really important and powerful mechanism of dealing with many environmental and social challenges. And here, not everyone has big chunks of land. We've changed many people's lives with this 1 acre because someone comes, they see this 1 acre, they go and either extrapolate or copy and paste. At home, we used to farm. We had pigs, we had some chickens, we never bought food. So that's one thing I knew I would do. And that's how I started. So I started with for pigs. Actually, these animals paid my tuition for my master's degree. So when I get married, I came with my pig. And then also the cost of living was quite high. I said to myself, for 9 months, I'm not going to buy my dog, I'm not going to grow it. It was productive. And then someone gave my husband a cow. Someone gives me chickens. Then before I know it, I have 10 chicks. Then I have 100. Along the way, I travel to Kenya and I find this lady with this smart red pond fish farms. And I'm like, I'm like, I'm going to put them here. So that's when I bought an acre. And then also the pigs on I bought an acre. Unknowingly, I cut this acre into proportion. Cows, some chickens, pigs, banana plantation. And then the fish. The beauty with integrated farming, as you wait for one enterprise to produce food, there's another that is giving you something. I think it's the way to go. So in 2013, there was a long job, very bad. And then the cost of living was really costly. And I just imported my pig. The pigs are my cash cow. I could not see my pigs dying of hunger. So that's myself, it's proud season. Everyone is saying there's no way. What do people in the desert do? That's how I came up with that podcast. For the unit, right now we are using things, but the best seed to use, but all cereals can from, but the best is fun. Now the science behind it is very expensive. Air, water, and water. So we feed on day one, it will feed. So because it takes 6 days for all the things. So we feed. So this is day one, day 2, day 3. So you keep pushing. And at day 6 feed, then you come back. And the beauty about hydroponics, it's cheap. And a kilo of value, you're going to get 6 kilos of fodder. Protein makes the biggest constitution of the most expensive to educate animal care. So we give them down out. We leave it out for 6 to 8 hours because you want as many flies to come and lay eggs on them as possible. After the flies have laid eggs, we carry it down, put it in a house, and leave it there for 4 to 5 days. And in that time, the maggots are growing. And then also we have the black soldier flies. We still introduce them to the pitch down. The lab is circulating on the gas slowly by slowly until when they become beasts. And that's what we really want. If you pick the pipeline, good touch. So work them very well, disinfect them, and then the chicken stuff. The jam where the maggots come from. That jam, we introduce it in the anthem jam. The countdown can use it twofold. We can use it in an anaerobic digester to make biogas, and we put it in bathing, and then when it rains, it sips through. We also introduced microbes. So this microbe help us decompose the cow dung faster to replenish the earthworm garden with the cow dung after a month of 80 when it's soil. Human, very rich. We use it to grow vegetables, or we use it to replenish nutrients in our banana plantation. And then the family liquid that comes from the earthworm, what we use as the principles and also as the fertilizer. Then we pick the earthworms, we feed the fish and the chicken. The water that comes from the fish, we take it to the garden and the type of trees.
I'm going to stop it there because it does become a little bit repetitive after that. But I think what you can see from that is this opportunity to look at all these different components and how they fit together. So let's try and dig into this in a little bit more detail, and we'll go through some of these different components individually. So the first one of these is agroforestry and regenerative agriculture. If you look at the opportunity to look at intercropping with trees. So if one looks at conventional forestry, there's always the issue of what we call this biodiversity desert. So if we're using pine or gum or wattle, essentially what happens is that you're excluding the community from underneath or using that property, and nothing else grows underneath it. Agroforestry is a regenerative opportunity where it looks at sequestering nitrogen and carbon back into the soil, but allows you to be able to then intercrop and plant either with cash crops, coffee and tea, or veggies, even export flowers and other opportunities. So working with the land is critically important. We need to understand that we've got to try and divert one of the biggest issues that we're facing in terms of climate change in this country, in the continent, is that some 650 million people across the continent have no access to electricity, and 70% of the population relies on charcoal as their primary source of energy. What happens then is that they're cutting down all the trees. The soils then don't have the protection and the cover. The soils get decimated. They're no longer able to produce crops. And then people move away from the villages into the towns to try and get jobs. And this cycle just repeats itself. And we've got to try and change that. And the opportunity around agroforestry is to be able to protect the remaining biodiversity, as well as encouraging additional new growth and indigenous growth. But then to look at understanding the different components. And in the middle of this, you will see also a little picture of a micro turbine. So energy can be produced by taking water from upstream, take it a few meters downstream, a couple of meters of head of water through a micro turbine can produce energy. Again, the water hyacinth and the opportunities to look at what we can do with that. But then also looking at digitalization within this. And here, for example, we've got this little tractor that's linked to a cell phone app. And one of the groups we've been working with through technical assistance on the CIRF program is Hello Tractor. Those of you who don't know it, again, it's about trying to make sure that people are able to utilize this kind of equipment without having to buy a tractor that sits there idle for most of the time. So how do we look at creating opportunities in there? So from the trees, that's going to come into our timber, and the opportunity now to produce that into our sawmills and other applications from that. The trees have flowers that produce honey. Some of the ones we're looking at now in Mozambique, Tanzania, can produce a ton of honey per hectare. But then there's all sorts of other options. For example, certain trees have a higher level of protein in their leaves, and that can be used as fodder. There's a high protein fodder feed. So the linkages are here. What we want to try and do is to bring the fruits and the vegetables out of that, those must go into a processing plant. A lot of Africa works on primary agriculture. For those of you, I mean, I personally, I garden in my home, and it gets frustrating. I buy 6 cabbage seedlings, costs me 20 Rand to do that. And then I've got to water this and all the rest of it. And by the time my cabbages are ready, it's a seasonal plant. I can go and buy a whole cabbage at a shop for 5 Rand. And I keep going, why do I keep bothering? But then I understand that I've got the nutrient value. Mine are organic, and yes, I've got to look after it, but it does give me a lot of sense of goodwill to do that. But essentially, all these different components fit together, and how we structure these different components. Understanding the carbon cycle is critically important. We have lost so much carbon in the soil. We need to put carbon back in. We need to understand that the Earth, before we came here, knew how to balance the nutrient cycle. It knew how to balance your nitrogen, your potassium, and your all the nutrients, as well as the nitrogen cycle and all conventional components that we've actually pretty much destroyed. Even from the system, you've got the feces, as you saw in the video, that are coming from your little cows and your chickens. Those have value, and those can go into biogas applications, into black soldier fly production, into organic fertilizer, etc. So all of these different components fit together. When we zoom in to something like this, here's a couple of examples. This is on a tree, it's a Chinese empress tree, or Paulownia elongata. And you can see what it does is it creates a canopy. Now, when we start to look at intercropping, one of the biggest issues we're facing is that everyone wants to go out and buy a tunnel. And then you've got to go and you've got to import the steel and the plastic and the framing and all the rest of it, and it's a high cost. We can actually use nature to mimic that requirement without going through the expense of that. And in this, you can see in the bottom left, there's a tea plantation. The bottom right is wheat that's being planted. This is in Germany, believe it or not. And then in the middle, this is pumpkins and other components that are growing in between them. So we've got to work with nature and understand what trees we can use, how we can maximize the application to still get the wood resources that we need, but at the same time, regenerate that land and get the opportunity to make that work. So when we look at agri-processing, ultimately, we don't want to just sell cabbages. I mean, a cabbage might be worth 5 Rand. But understand you can convert that into juice. You can convert that into sauerkraut. It can become pickles, which have much higher value. So how do we ensure that we create the value chains within that system? But through the previous ones that we've spoken about, is there solar power, hydropower, gasification, anaerobic digestion, which can bring power into systems. We don't need to look at grid-tied applications using fossil fuels. So from these agri-processing applications, we then have, obviously, our vegetables go in, and then we have the waste streams that come out. And what we do is that we ensure that any of the green waste that comes through here, sorry, I'm getting harassed by a herd of hodidas. Any of the green waste that comes through there, we need to make sure that goes into compost and vermiculture or into feed. There's a great opportunity in terms of chickens and pigs that can use green waste for feed, or we go into black soldier fly application to create the protein. And again, that can go into the feed. Whatever comes from there can go into the compost and the vermiculture. And even from our livestock, after our abattoir, we're then going to have a number of different waste products. These can then go into static piles or anaerobic digestion systems. There's a number of industrial wastes that come out of there also that can go into biogas systems. And again, we end up with a sludge or a digestate that can go into static pile type systems and become a bioorganic fertilizer and create different components. But again, we're creating energy. And the energy will help us with things like cold storage, making sure that we protect our plants and reduce post-harvest losses and increase the value of the systems that we have. If you look at the agroforestry processing, essentially then we have timber. Timber is largely imported into most African countries, which is unusual because a lot of African countries are exporting round logs, mostly to China, unfortunately. but there are moves to try and halt that. But what we need to look at is in terms of making sure that we have regenerative and recuperative timber opportunities in terms of our own local utilization, and again, add value. Local sawmills to create timber, veneer plants, looking at local eco-construction, and then ensuring that all of the waste, because from a tree, about 45% of that tree is waste. The log is the primary component, but about 45% is your branches, your leaves, the side cuttings, the bark, etc. Again, that can go through gasification, and gasification can create a very clean, low sulfur biofuel that can also help in terms of the shipping industry, in terms of transport. Shipping industry, as of 2020, is under critical analysis to desulfurize their fuels, or it can go into the byproduct as a biochar, which then goes into, again, a bioorganic fertilizer, and that goes back into the system. So again, we create the circle when we create the loop. But the key here, the critical component is, in terms of circular economy, is the human-centric component to that. People are the center of this different components of the circular economy. So when we start to develop all these different components, then we've got energy coming into the system, as we've described, from the different components: biogas, solar, little micro turbines, etc. But we create jobs, we're creating food security, we're creating skills and opportunities. We're not just growing vegetables. A lot of people are against agriculture because they see it as kind of beneath them, but we're talking about agriculture in all of its terms, with all of its value chains. And that's where it needs to be embraced across Africa, to look at how we can provide and literally feed the rest of the world, which we have the opportunity to do. And from these systems, we're losing wastewater. Let's get that back into the system, whether it's grey water or black water, that can be processed and come back in. We can extract the nutrients. Household waste, we can manage that. But effectively, what's happening is, from a human-centric perspective, from a people perspective, we start to look at massive increases and benefits in terms of health, education, nutrition. I'm not sure if our friends are online from the government departments, where they're busy looking at different components around the health and nutrition. We have some scary statistics in South Africa, let alone the rest of Africa, with regards to the number of people who are malnourished, and the issues that has in terms of health and education. So we really need to bring all these different components together. But ultimately, what this means is that when we're getting into this linear versus circular, we're doing work in Seychelles, for example, at the moment. 98% of the products and the foods are imported into the islands, but they're not thinking about the circular economy and how this can change and adapt to different components. All we are doing is we are making the big global corporates, the big fat cats, richer and richer, and we're creating this diverse sort of inequality. So we're left, the local population's left going, well, we're importing everything and we're paying through the nose for stuff, and we're not getting the value and what we need. So changing to circular brings all of this together. How do we look at making sure that local populations are empowered and enriched, through food systems, fertilizers, skills, building materials, proteins, energy? The circular economy allows that opportunity to look at these different components, and agriculture is a key component to creating a local sustainable circular application. So ultimately, again, in what you're saying there is that circular food systems are not just about crops and agriculture. It's about all these different components. And there are systemic interconnections, as we said, with energy, water, infrastructure, trade, digitalization, design and packaging, transport, logistics, skills, jobs, etc., etc. How these things come together. And we need to understand that these food systems work in context with the broader principles of applications across all these sectors to really understand the potential for long-term sustainable change and creating a just transition. So, as suggested before, what we're going to do is we're going to go through one more little video, and then I'm going to move into more on the circular food systems in Rwanda. It's another short video.
Circular economy. Agriculture can no longer grow waste. Nature of the problem. Since the 1950s, agricultural production has grown exponentially thanks to the exploitation of high-yielding crops, synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, and agricultural machinery. These innovations have drastically altered what some consider should otherwise be an inherently regenerative industry, being food, part of nature. Today, the amount of energy required to sustain our diets is astonishing, as well as the amount of food that gets thrown away together with the plastic that contains it. But let's analyze the current make, waste economic model in details. Take a vast amount of finite resources is extracted from the earth. 41 rocks, minerals, and elements serve the 5 major agricultural uses, which include fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides, physical soil amendments, animal and poultry feeds, food storage and processing. Most agricultural activities are powered by fossil fuels and plagued by an inefficient utilization of inputs that escalates even further the requirement of natural resources. If that wasn't enough, water pollution is another major challenge, deeply aggravated by the poor management of byproducts generated during food processing, distribution, and packaging. Waste. Europe alone generates some 700 million tons of agri-food waste each year. That translates in approximately 1/3 of what is produced for human consumption. And where does all that waste go to? Only 2% of valuable biological nutrients in food byproducts and organic waste is composted or otherwise valorized, while a significant portion of the rest is often released untreated, damaging the environment and threatening life. Problem quantification. For every calorie consumed in the U.S., the equivalent energy of 13 calories of oil is burned to produce it. Such a low energy return on investment is what makes the agri-food industry accountable for 1/4 of human-caused greenhouse gas emissions yearly. And it is not just about the air. Inefficiency and malpractice are also responsible for 70% of deforestation and freshwater demand worldwide. Circular practices. Tackling the linear paradigm. Significant opportunities exist to innovate across the agri-food supply chain, making practices more efficient and less resource-intensive. Design. Meat production is not sustainable to feed a growing population, as our consumption per capita will have to diminish drastically. New plant-based proteins could represent a viable alternative, while harvesting insects for human consumption could eventually become trendy. Entomophagy also concerns feeding insects to animals. In this sense, animal husbandry could benefit from the ability that insects have to turn low-grade food waste into valuable high-end proteins and fats. Studying processes to treat a variety of food waste and byproducts can result in attaining valuable ingredients for new recipes. Sourcing. The use of precision agricultural and farming techniques can greatly minimize the amount of external inputs. Regenerative agricultural practices can restore soil fertility, sequester carbon, protect watersheds, and facilitate biodiversity. They include shifting from synthetic to organic fertilizers, using greater crop variation, and employing rotational crop and grazing. Favoring local produce reduces the need for excess packaging and shortens distribution supply chains. Besides better interaction with producers in the para-urban and rural surroundings, development of circular urban farming systems is often welcomed by city residents. Sale. The adoption of blockchain technology is improving the traceability of food and therefore transparency and safety. Similarly, the use of artificial intelligence in supply chain management means safer transport from the field to the shelf. End of life. Inevitable byproducts like nitrogen and phosphorus should be used at their highest value. Unavoidable biowaste can be valorized within the agricultural system as fertilizers or to produce energy and chemicals for the wider bioeconomy. In this sense, cities can be centers where food byproducts are transformed into biofuels, organic fertilizers, biomaterials, or even medicines. Finally, advanced technologies are being developed for the exploitation and treatment of agro-industrial wastewaters and animal effluents. Business and policy advice. Recommendations to business. Learn how to reduce all avoidable agri-food waste. Find use for all unavoidable waste. Get in touch with a growing number of health-conscious consumers who are demanding organic produce, alternative sources of proteins, and less dairy products. Recommendations to government. drive county-level policies to promote large-scale ecological regeneration programs aimed at degraded grasslands, encourage collaboration between local organic producers with conscientious food brands, retailers, restaurants, consumers, waste managers, and other urban food actors. Be careful to avoid a biased emphasis on waste use versus system efficiency.
So that's a great opportunity in terms of from world dynamics to understand that. But one of the other issues we face is understanding financing. How do we finance the circular economy? And agriculture is always at the end of financing. It's easier to finance a coal mine or an oil well than it is to finance agriculture. Now, I'm going to give you an example here that frustrates the hell out of me. It's a project we were looking at in Mauritius with a particular region that produced 17,000 tons of agri-residues per year. Now, we were looking at developing a number of different components out of this, where the cost of this was going to be in the region of $850,000 with regard to the capex, and operational expenses of about another 400,000. So a total budget of about $1.2, $1.3 million to achieve the outcome. When we looked at this in terms of the reality, this project wasn't approved by the banking system, and simply because banking system look at input and output. So they look at the capex in terms of a compost production, and then they look at the sale of the compost in terms of the offset of the capex, and they said it doesn't make sense. It'll take you 25 years to repay this. But they don't look at the integration of the system, and this is what I want to try and look at here. So if we looked at that component, we would have produced 12,000 tons of microbial compost. At 4 tons a hectare, that would have covered 3,000 hectares of sugarcane. Looking at the food waste, we would have created about 270,000 liters of organic liquid fertilizer using fermentation systems that would be suitable for 6,500 hectares of additional sugarcane. The vermicompost was a much smaller opportunity, but would have been useful for some small-scale 22 hectares of agriculture. But the big thing is that when one looks at the application and increasing the carbon content and putting organics back into the soil, we were looking conservatively at a reduction of 25% of the application rate of herbicides and pesticides, which would have saved about 25% annual savings per year, which would have been about $514,000 a year. The saving on chemical fertilizers, they're using 600 kilograms a hectare, and at that stage, $590 per ton. Just reducing, again, a conservative minimum estimate of 15% of that by increasing the carbon content and the organics would have saved $1.12 million over 5 years. The irrigation savings in terms of bringing that carbon back into the soil, we calculated at about 170,000 liters per hectare. That would have saved another $450,000 per year. But then in terms of the nutrition value and the yield, we would have increased the sucrose content by about 1.7% on average, and increased the cane yield by 10 tons per hectare, which would have given another $11 million increase in revenue over 5 years. So when we start to look at the fact that that $1.3 million investment would have saved $776,000 a year, plus that's excluding the costs that it was taken before of taking these 17,000 tons to landfill, and increased profits by 2.2 million per year. But we can't get the finance because, again, the financial system is not used to understanding impact, benefits, and systems, and that's what we need to change. So let's focus in on circular food systems for Rwanda, and I'm going to try and jump through this quite quickly and leave us a bit of time for questions. But ASIN has been involved with the circular food systems for Rwanda, and our focus there is transforming food systems. So we've worked with our partners, I'll discuss later. But our focus there was in helping small, medium enterprises adopt regenerative practices, looking at food loss and waste reduction and creating value from byproducts. The last point, critically important. And we combined technical support and capacity building to really try and make the shift, and we focused on the SMEs. So I'm not going to go through again the circular versus linear food system, but effectively, again, the core principles: regenerative farming practices, reduce food loss and waste, and resource and nutrient reuse. When you look at the benefits of a circular food system, there's cost savings. It can help businesses reduce costs by using agricultural byproducts as inputs, improving resource efficiency, and generating new income streams by developing new products. Our CIRF program, we've developed over 21 products, new products that are new income streams for the groups we're working with. But biodiversity is also critically important. So linear agriculture, it just degrades the entire system, the soil microbiology, nutrient leaching, chemical use, etc. But going circular allows us to then look at restoring the soil. In terms of labor, and again, remember the human-centric component, there's a lot of benefits in terms of this, which means that we reduce farm inputs that allow farmers to use their time and energy on other more important parts of farm work. And climate resilience, it provides an opportunity to understand that diversification, we become less dependent on a single crop, we reduce vulnerability to climate shocks and pests, and it also helps to mitigate adverse climatic conditions. And then food security, critically important in that we've got a diverse range of crops, soil regeneration, high nutrient value, supports long-term sustainability and maintains soil health. So there's some of the partners that we have. IKEA Foundation, we're the key funder in terms of developing this 3-year program. We're about to embark on the second stage of that and increasing that across Africa under a program we call ACE for Food, African Circular Economy for Food Initiative. Excuse me. There's the website at the bottom there you can have a look at, and you will get the slides. If we look at some of the case studies, we focused on the SMEs. Holy Agriculture, one of the SMEs, implemented a mixed cropping systems and looked at climate smart seeds, mulching, composting, which improved food security and their productivity, as well as the overall biodiversity. Glory Poultry Farm was another one, nearly doubling its operations, turning waste into income by producing compost from livestock farming and mixed cropping. So rather than looking at those waste as an issue, they're trying to get rid of it, it was incorporated into the system. And we implemented conservation agriculture. It became more profitable in terms of tasks around compost production, access to diversified incomes, etc. There are challenges of a linear food system, and these include operational costs, high operational costs due to reliance on expensive inputs, chemicals, fertilizers, herbicides, pesticides, and fertilizers, and then also frequent post-harvest losses and inefficient use of resources. So how do we change that? And again, if we look at some of our companies, in terms of synthetic input production, Rwanda Biosolutions, we're sourcing household waste from the local landfill, as well as natural waste from rabbit rearing facilities to produce an organic compost that they now sell into maize and cabbage fields. Souk farms, for example, worked with smallholder horticulture outgrowers, and they implement regenerative practices, and that's reduced their post-harvest losses from 25% to 11%, minimized waste, created a number of new products, and enhanced crop quality. Njordfrey is an aquaculture system which looked at making sure that they reduce their single-use packaging and cut the costs and reduce packaging waste, amongst other things. In terms of the digitalization, we've looked at the Internet of Things to improve the inputs and productivity and efficiency of the systems. And Kikasali Coffee Company, who used to throw away their cherries and pulp, as well as the husks, are now converting the husks into pellets, which is used as an alternative low carbon, low smoke energy. And then also looking at vermiculture that they're looking at with the coffee pulp and other components. So these are some of the applications that we're looking at. And businesses essentially through the circular food system solutions have created and adopted circular practices that have changed massively in terms of helping them to reduce waste, lower the costs, improve soil health, generate new income from byproducts, and making their operations more resilient, sustainable, and climate smart. Tech Adopter is the one group that we used to, they used to just focus on manufacturing farming implements. They're now looking at a digitalization system. Again, to look at the sharing option. Most people will use a tractor for 3 months of the year. Why do you need one that's going to sit in the garage for the next 9 months? Glory Poultry Farm has done amazing things in terms of doubling its operations and looking at all the different options that we discussed before in terms of the benefits. Another coffee company called Gasuma, located in eastern Rwanda. When you process coffee cherries, wastewater is a critical issue. It creates an acidic, toxic pollutant back into the environment, and they have installed an aerobic constructed wetland. They treat that wastewater, and that's about 1.6 million liters of acidic runoff that they avoid. But then they're also looking at water reuse, which lowers the operational costs and enhances their environmental stability. And Holy Agriculture is another one, mixed cropping systems, increasing production yields, reducing input costs. And they've done amazing things in terms of the work they've done in creating an ecosystem with the local communities and boosting resilience to climate change and local nutrition opportunities. And again, CAPCN looking at developing natural products for natural pest control, predator insects, for pheromone traps and companion planting. And that replaces toxic pesticides and safeguards both crops and human health. Classic Farm is another one looking at aquaponics, where again, the nutrient-rich fish water fertilizes crops and the plant waste then feeds black soldier flies, and that's then used to feed the fish. And that circular approach has more than doubled both their vegetable and their fish yields. So there are real applications. These are not, this is not pie in the sky. This is not theoretical. There are real applications and real opportunities where we can take the application for circular economy and really ensure that we drive that opportunity for change and allow the opportunity to regenerate our planet, be healthier and more productive in that application. So thank you for your time. I'm open to any questions. I haven't been seeing the chat, Krista, while I've been presenting, so I hope everyone saw the videos. I hope everything came through clearly.
That was perfect. Thank you very much, Chris. Really appreciate it. And I think throughout the presentation, specifically when you mentioned the challenges that we have in this sector, I think it's clear that there are many challenges other than agricultural or food system challenges. But if we don't have healthy, nutritious food and clean water to drink, I think no other problems really matters. So that's why these types of conversations are really crucial to really make sure, not only for us but for future generations, we make sure that they have things to eat and drink going forward. Okay, so then from an agenda point of view, I think we can move over to the Q&A session. So please raise your hand if there's any questions you want to ask, any contributions as well. Thanks a lot for everyone that introduced themselves, saying what you do. You can also, if someone wants to unmute and give some comments, ask questions, please feel free. Please just raise your hand and I can see, and then I'll be able to unmute you. Okay, let's go. Mona is first up, and now Mike. Okay, you can unmute.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for this great presentation, this great input. This is Mona. I'm from Morocco, Casablanca. I do have composting units in the Casablanca region. And I do have a startup that tries to work on the development of electromechanical composters. My goal, my ambition, ideally would be to democratize or Uberize the composting to all farmers and hotels or restaurants in Morocco. But it's super challenging because the mindset is not there. And also because, as Chris has said, investing in a composting platform costs a lot of money, and compared to European business models where the entrepreneurs is paid for the recycling of the waste, not for the sale of the compost. Here it's different. If we need to sell our compost to be able to have an ROI, and the compost is, and the value of the compost is cheap also. So it doesn't encourage investments in such solutions. Sorry, I have birds around. I don't know if you hear me well. So my question is, how can we make these solutions accessible to everyone? One of the things I'm trying to work on is to make locally produced turners, locally produced windrow turners and machines that can be easily low tech and easily repaired. But it's a whole industry, and so yeah, I would like to hear your feedback and what you think of how we can make it more accessible.
Thank you, Mona. And again, this thing about capacity is always an issue. I mean, we are seeing strides with Morocco. Africa Circular is busy doing the roadmap. And again, part of that is about creating capacity, knowledge, and understanding in terms of what these things mean. How do you look at the whole value chain with regards to the inputs and what they provide? But we also need to look at the option of saying, is compost the only way of looking at that? And again, we need to understand that looking at aerobic composting application with windrow turners and everything else might not be the right opportunity in the right place. And again, it's understanding the distribution of your waste, the quality of your waste, and where it is, to then be able to say, right, do we need to then look at alternatives? So one would be black soldier fly, one could look at vermicomposting, even looking at static pile systems, which I advocate for, because compost loses about 45% of its waste through to the atmosphere. Whereas static pile systems have a much higher carbon nitrogen ratio, which allows for the lesser loss in the waste. You've got about 12% loss. So those are also systems, but again, bioorganic fertilizers. How do we take that then, bring in biochar, look at maybe frass as another product, rock dust that comes in to create bioorganic fertilizers. Compost is always the bottom of the value chain. Whilst that's a useful thing to look at, one again needs to look at that valorization throughout the system and different opportunities for different applications. If from your lips to my head, I mean, if we could get funders to understand the opportunity cost, the diversion from landfill, the methane avoidance, the opportunity in terms of offset of costs of organic fertilizer or inorganic fertilizers, that would be where we need to get to. But that's part of what ASIN does and Africa Circular across the continent, is that we look at developing understanding and capacity in terms of what this really means. So I hope that's answered your question.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thanks, Mona.
Thank you very much, Mona. Next up is Piotr.
Oh, I'm muted. Okay, now. Yes, hello, and thank you, Chris. Thanks, ASIN, for this interesting webinar and presentation. I have a question already. It is in the chat. You can, Chris, read and prepare. But I wanted just to reply to Mona, a very interesting question. Your point was on democratizing, so giving access. And I think it is impossible to democratize if we are aiming for capex expensive elements. No, so in compost you typically can democratize it by showing the low-tech solution without additional elements. You can do it really, like, just to say, one of the way we do it in zero waste communities, we democratize it by showing to everyone, even households, that they can do their own compost on the balcony, on the terrace, or in the garden without any shredder and anything like that. And imagine if more and more society can do this, then it will also come to bigger companies, because the same people who do it in their garden, they are bosses of big companies. So instead of going top down, also like building this capacity from the bottom, like if more and more people see and do their compost at home, because using their food scraps, this is already, I think, one way to democratize and to build awareness so that the big bosses of companies can also then, yeah, just that is just another way. But my question, Chris, is, yeah, we work together and we know, but my point is, this is about circular agriculture. So circulation of nutrients and circulation of carbon. And we have the hierarchy of waste management. And so always recycling or composting, which composting is also recycling, is higher than any type of energy transformation. So, and in your presentation, you gave many different solutions, including black soldier fly, which I work on a lot, and we can also talk about that later. But you also gave some solutions such as gasification and use for fuel, heating, and where the material might be lost. And then so the carbon is also emitted, even if it's just second use again, but it is emitted. So yeah, I wanted to understand the balance. Where do you draw the line? What can be burned and what not, and when? Thanks.
Absolutely, and I think we've got to understand that again, I put into the presentation that when we talk about recover, the waste to energy side of things is something that should be at the lowest thing on the hierarchy at the end of the day. The opportunity, though, is to understand that sometimes if you look at, for example, the work we did in Benin, when you start looking at the fact there's like 1.3 million tons of rice husks, there's only so much you can do with that. But there's opportunity there to then look at extracting out the biochar. The biochar is an opportunity to then get the biofuel out through gasification. So it is an opportunity. But what we advocate for is higher up that value chain constantly. So if you look at biorefinery, if you look at rice husks, there's a number of options one can do from biorefinery application to extract out the different components that can go into the pharmaceutical industry or a much higher grade. If you look at, for example, nutrient extraction, the reality is if you look at vegetable peelings or vegetables that are, or ugly fruit, what we call ugly fruit vegetables that aren't appealing, that go into the general system. How do we extract the nutrients out of that? And there's very easy, simple systems through drying, etc., to ensure that we capture those nutrients, we get those back into the system through porridges and cereals and things that provide high nutrient level and not sugars and starches. So there's lots of ways of looking at up the value chain, and we would advocate for that constantly. But sometimes there are just massive volumes, and there are opportunities where energy is required. So yeah, there's a balance, but we got to always look and advocate for what's the highest in the value chain constantly, and that's the basic principle of circularity.
Excellent. Thanks a lot for that input, Piotr. Very, very important to always consider that hierarchy. Deborah, you're up next. Go ahead.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Hi.
Okay, thanks, Christo. And thank you so much, Chris, for the great presentation, really educative. So I'm really excited that we're talking about the food systems. And I like one thing you said at the beginning, it's not just about agriculture, about food production, like on the farm. So that's really important. I just wanted to pick off rather on what I think that was Mona, the question she asked, because she made a statement, people don't have the understanding, so it is hard to get them to do these things. And I was wondering, how can we activate the social aspect of this transition to a secular food system? Because in your presentation as well, you made a similar comment that it is not just about getting these things to work, but it is also secular economy or secular food systems also connect much more to the people. It's about the people, enriching the people, not just with finance, but also in the food they eat. Absolutely. But how can we activate the social aspect? Yes, the data is good. Yes, it's good to talk about the facts, but change is difficult, change is hard. And one thing that it's hard to say, but people are not just logical beings, and that's the truth. People are not just logical beings. So how can we get people to really start, or how can we as advocates start activating the social aspect of getting people aboard to transition or to get to the understanding of this whole concept of circular economy and the different aspects in general. Thank you.
Thanks, Deborah. It's a great question, and it really comes back to, again, what Mona said about the democratization, and even when we come to the basic principle, which I mentioned several times. Getting Debs, just mute quick, thank you. Is understanding that just transition, putting people at the center of that system. And to be honest with you, what we've done through the CIRF program has been a massive learning for us. And I've been involved in agricultural applications in South Africa and Kenya and other places where they're trying to target the farmer on the ground. Now, farming is not seen as a career path by the youth coming through. Nobody wants to be a farmer. Nobody wants to get their hands dirty. But again, we're trying to say that it's not about the farming. It's not about the growing the crops. There's a whole component to that. There's a whole bunch of value chains. On the CIRF program, what we did was we focused on the SMEs. The beauty of that, in terms of all these unexpected outcomes that have come from this, was the creation of an ecosystem where some of the successful farmers that we had with the training, they were bringing on the neighbors and everything else. The neighbors became suppliers. The suppliers became empowered, and the opportunities now to look at exchanging different components. We started to see a benefit in terms of supply chains and market linkages. We started to see impacts in terms of, well, job creation is something that we thought was going to happen, but understanding those different applications and benefits is vitally important to look at how we create those outcomes. So that input has had a massive knock-on effect by just getting down to the brass knuckles and sorting these sort of things out, rather than dealing with this at a policy level or trying to deal with this at a strategy level, is to say we need to be on the ground. We need to start measuring those different inputs and how those different inputs can really just try and bring together all these. The opportunity is in understanding practical application as to how these things link. So we come back to the youth and we say it's not about the food system. So now we start to look at youth getting involved in terms of providing inputs or processes or becoming suppliers or looking at the different dynamics that are created around that. So practically, I think that to democratize this, we really now need to get away from strategy and talking. We need to get down to project development and showing people on the ground how that works. And that video on the 1 acre farm is just brilliant. I mean, everybody should know about that.
Thanks for that question, Debs. Maybe something that I can add from my side with regarding the CIRF project as well is a lady called Agatha, Chris.
So the best hugger in the world.
She's an amazing woman. She's highly regarded in her community, and she's the owner of Glory Poultry Farm, which you saw in the presentation had amazing results from this program. And she basically stood up as a champion in her community, and she basically started a community composting group, let's call it that.
Yeah. And
she basically taught and encouraged everyone in her community to start composting. So I think, to come back to your question, Debs, how to change the mindset, change the mentality of people, is to have one central person that people look up to and can follow, basically. And we saw it clearly in the CIRF program with Agatha. She was an excellent example, and people just mimicked her and followed her. And we saw great progress just from one person standing up and being an example for others around them. So maybe that's also one way of influencing people, rather than hitting them with data and numbers and things. Just showing them an example of what to do and what the results can be. Yeah, my 2 cents. Thanks for that, Debs. Then Cubana, over to you.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Loud and clear.
Okay. I would just like to add on the issue that has been raised of lack of awareness. And I would just like to say it's one of the issues that we also been having a challenge with. So one of the solutions that we sort of come up with that came out because of the frustration, we have these incredible solution or technologies that creates compost and also biogas. Then we have biofertilizer as well, but people are not really buying into it. Then the solution was then to just create a podcast, not wasting a single story, just to educate people. Okay, and then I don't know, can I be able to share a video in here just to showcase our case study?
Maybe put it into the chat as a link. We can all have a
Yeah.
look at it afterwards. Can you do
I
that?
think goodbye.
Yeah, okay. So we have a mechanical composting machine that creates compost within 24 hours, and then it processes our organic waste and create compost. But the challenge there is the challenges we currently facing is driving customers into adopting a solution that divert organic waste from the landfill site into our facilities. That's the challenge we have. And so I just want to ask, how can we sort of get customers into changing their mindset and diverting their organic waste from landfill into?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Giovanni, as you say, a lot of this is about understanding the way that the world is changing. We spoke about digitalization and the opportunities in terms of that, but critically, one of the opportunities we have now is in terms of local communications and social communications, social media, allows us a great opportunity to be able to get out there. But then also we're looking at artificial intelligence in terms of the applications of blockchain and driving traffic into particular components, looking at the utilization of tools and opportunities. It is about getting the information out there. It is about making sure, first, make sure that the business makes sense, that, from a CapEx perspective, from an offset and a benefit perspective, that your business makes sense. And then showcase that. Podcasts are one thing, the different social media channels and opportunities to get that out there. And this is what ASIN does. One of the ASIN's biggest things, that's why we do so many webinars. It's about sharing that information. It's about trying to capacitate and trying to encourage and trying to develop and really just getting that message out there. So thanks for that link. We'll have a look at that, Kobana. But the issue of getting to market and getting to scale is an issue we face constantly across Africa through some really amazing applications out there. And what we try and advocate for is for people not to reinvent the wheel. It's been done. There's so much good technology applications, examples out there. And that's also what we need to do through these particular platforms, is create, link and network people where we can learn and work together to create a sustainable future for us all.
%, and I can't agree more with what you said there, Chris, because there's so many people working on certain problems. If you just have a quick Google search or read up a bit, so if you have a problem, the chances are very good that someone else has had the same problem and has solved it somehow. So that's a good point.
Yeah, if you look at AI, I mean, often when I'm looking at different business situations like the one we're developing now in the Seychelles around organic layer systems, there are critical components that we don't understand. If you know, and I mean, ChatGPT and all the rest of it, DeepSeek are just, it's another Google platform unless you know how to prompt it properly. But there's a lot of information out there if you ask the right questions and dig in and find out who's doing what, where this is, and what the opportunities are. There's massive, massive opportunity, not necessarily to copy, but what I'm saying is that we stand on the shoulders of our brothers and sisters, and we're constantly just going the next stage, and how do we make things better? So as an information world, I'm very, very positive about the future. I think there's so many different options that we have that will allow us to create a very viable, very beautiful and sustainable future for ourselves.
100%. And exactly like you said, Chris, we have all the information is at our fingertips with the technology that we do have. Yeah. So I think in today's time, it's just that the matter of taking that information and implementing and doing something and being active, and yeah, implementation at the end of the day.
Totally.
So many opportunities.
I'm just going through the chat. See, there's a bit of bits and pieces going backwards and forwards. Kubana's put his link in there. Theo, talking about the demonstrations like the Center Songhai, where young people can come and learn directly. There's a number of these around. Absolutely, Theo, the demonstration centers. I think, Theo, we're also looking at that circular farm system in Chad as an opportunity. There's the Circular Center of Excellence in Ethiopia. There's the Innovation Hub in Rwanda. And there's a lot of great opportunities out there. Yeah, sexy farmers. Thank you, Deborah. Absolutely. How do we make farming sexy again? That's the way to go about it. All right. If there's no other questions, I'm very happy to switch off and gain you all 15 minutes. There's something we'd like you to have a look at, just in terms of your feedback. I'll leave it over to Krista to shut up. Not shut up, shut down.
Shut down. Thanks, Chris. And then thank you once again Chris, for your valuable presentation. You can see in the chat people really enjoyed it. So thanks a lot for your time and all the efforts. And thank you for the active participation, everyone. Thank you for the chat. Please have a look at this survey just to give us some feedback. Like Chris said, this is something that ASEN is really passionate about, is sharing this knowledge and capacitating our community. So that's why we do these webinars, and that's why we want to continuously improve them. So please give us your feedback, and then please have a look at our social medias and keep an eye out for our Black Soldier Fly webinar coming next week. And Piotr, that was on screen earlier, will be one of our guest speakers there. So please keep an eye out for that one. And then if there's no other questions or comments, I think we can close the session. And like we said in the beginning, we will send out the recording to everyone, and also for those who registered and might not be able to have made it. Thank you, everyone. Have an awesome day and see you soon again.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.